The authorities' final report on the Cressfall behavioral optimization trial ran to 41 pages. I had read it so many times as I could recite the executive summary from memory, standing at the forward viewport of the warden, while the stars held still, and the navigation clock counted down the last 6 hours. Behavioral substrate, human, colonial, trial duration, 11 years, 4 months, compound designation, Vaethari Biotic Series 7 row, delivery mechanism, colony water reclamation system, junction node C4, Cressfall 9, intended effect, suppression of acute stress response architecture, and reduction of intercolonial conflict frequency. Observed effect, aggressive neural degradation in 4,200 of 4,200 subjects, mortality at 18 months, 1,847. They had written subjects. I closed the report file the same way I always did, and I walked back to the command chair, and I looked at the clock. 5 hours, 51 minutes. I had been to Cressfall 9 once. 4 months after the authorities' trial records were recovered from a routine signals intercept and forwarded with no particular urgency to Earth's Colonial Health Directorate. The Directorate had flagged it. The flag had reached me. I had taken a transport out with a medical attaché and 2 junior analysts, and I had walked the ward they had built, in what used to be the colony's community hall. It smelled like recycled air and antiseptic. The beds were close together. The survivors, 2,353 of them, or the ones well enough to be in that particular ward, did not speak much. Some of them could not. The neural architecture the enzyme had targeted was not, as the authority had apparently believed, redundant. It was load-bearing. Language lived there. Coordination lived there. The part of a person that recognized a face and understood what recognition meant lived there. A woman in the 3rd row had looked at me for a long time. I did not know whether she knew I was a person. I did not know whether, after 11 years of the compound in her water, she still had the architecture to know. I wrote her name down when I left. I wrote all the names down. It took 3 days. The authority sent its first communication 9 weeks after the Cressfall Mandate was formally registered with Earth's Naval Coordination Directorate. The mandate was not a declaration of war. Requires 2 parties acknowledging a state of conflict. The authority had not acknowledged anything. The mandate was a filing. 340 warships, the warden at the lead, assigned to a specific administrative action, decommissioning of every Vaethari Biotic Authority installation across 6 systems. The number had been calculated at Earth's Colonial Affairs Chamber. 1 ship per 8 dead. The arithmetic was exact. The authority's first communication was formal and measured. It expressed concern at the mobilization and requested clarification of Earth's intentions. It referenced the Interstellar Compact on Biological Research, Articles 7 through 14, and noted that the Cressfall trial had been conducted within the authorities' internally ratified protocols. It suggested a joint review panel. We did not respond. The second communication arrived 3 weeks later, as we crossed the outer marker of the Vaethari continuance's 4th system. It was addressed to the warden specifically, to the commanding officer, by title. It noted that the authority had filed a formal grievance with the Galactic Compact Arbitration Board, and that our continued approach constituted a violation of standing arbitration protocols. It requested that we hold position. We did not respond. I should explain something about the Vaethari Biotic Authority, because I have found that people misunderstand what it was. It was not a military body. It had no warships of its own. It was a regulatory institution, the body that licensed biological research across Vaethari continuance space, that issued permits for genetic modification trials, that maintained the records. It was staffed by administrators and researchers and legal officers. And it had operated for 400 years with the absolute conviction that its internal protocols constituted the boundary of what was permissible. If something was inside the protocol, it was allowed. If something was allowed, it was correct. They had filed 11 years of quarterly reports on the Cressfall trial. Every 3 months, for 11 years, someone had sat at a desk and compiled the mortality figures and the degradation rates and the behavioral suppression data, and formatted it correctly, and submitted it through the proper channels, and it had been reviewed and approved and archived. 14 people, We determined later had reviewed those quarterly reports over the course of the trial. 14 people had read the mortality figures, which were rising, and had signed the continuation approvals. The compound had been doing exactly what their models said it would do. They considered the trial a success. The third communication came as we entered the final approach corridor to the authorities' primary installation at Vaethari Station Drellin Kos. It was not addressed to the commanding officer. It was addressed to the Colonial Liaison Channel, the channel used for routine administrative matters between human colonial stations and Vaethari, regulatory bodies. Someone had made a decision about that. Someone had chosen the Colonial Liaison Channel deliberately, I assumed, frame what followed as an administrative matter. The message stated that the Vaethari Biotic Authority was prepared to acknowledge procedural irregularities in the documentation of the Cressfall trial. It was prepared to offer compensatory arbitration, was prepared to discuss the formal dissolution of the specific research division responsible for Series 7 row development. It asked us to respond on the Colonial Liaison Channel at our earliest convenience. My communications officer looked at me. I told her to log the transmission as received and to make no reply. Drellin Kos was not large as stations went. It housed the authority's central archive, its licensing board, its administrative directorate, and approximately 900 personnel. The installation itself was a functional structure, practical, documented, very well organized. I had read the layout surveys. I could have told you where the archive servers were. I could have told you where the quarterly report files were stored. The mandate did not require me to be on the bridge for the final sequence. The Cressfall Mandate was a naval action, not a personal one. My job had been intelligence, and the intelligence work was done. But I stayed at the forward viewport, the same place I had stood when I read the authorities' report, for the last time 6 hours earlier, and I watched Drellin Kos come up on the long-range feed. 340 warships do not make noise. That is something people do not expect. They move in formation, and they do what they are assigned to do, and the void between them is absolute silence. The warden's weapons officer read the confirmation sequence aloud, because that is protocol. I listened to his voice, and I watched the feed, and I held the list of names in my memory the way I had been holding it for 8 months. When it was done, I went to the communications console myself. I pulled up the Vaethari Biotic Authority's official broadcast frequency, the one they used for research licensing announcements and public safety advisories, and quarterly regulatory updates. The one their 14 reviewing officers had used to distribute 440 approved quarterly reports on the Cressfall trial. I read the names on that frequency, all 1,847 of them. It took a long time. When I finished, there was a silence on the channel. Then, the authority's automated acknowledgement system responded, the way it responded to all transmissions on the regulatory broadcast frequency. Form confirmation, a case number, a timestamp, filed and received. I logged it, closed the channel, and told the navigation officer to set course for the second installation. There were 5 more.